Close your eyes for just a moment. Imagine that the world, the hum of screens, the press of deadlines, the endless forward rush of modern hours begins, very gently, dissolve, like morning frost retreating from a window pane, pulls back, softens, and disappears into a quiet, silver mist. You are safe. You're warm. And somewhere, far beneath the noise of the present, history is breathing. Tonight we are going somewhere ancient, somewhere that smells of wood smoke and beeswax, of cold Highland stone and the faint sweet ghost of dried heather. We are travelling to the heart of Tudor-Era Scotland, to a time when the 16th century was young and strange and luminous, when the nights were truly dark and the only light that stood between a person and the infinite black of a Scottish evening was the trembling golden flame of a single candle. There is a castle waiting for you. It has been waiting for a very long time. Its towers rise from a hillside wrapped in mist and old pine forest. Its walls are thick, so thick that the cold of the outside world barely whispers through them. Inside, every corridor, every chamber, every deep-set window breathes with the particular unhurried stillness of a world that has learned to rest. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow. The gates are open. The torchlight is warm. Step inside. Before we go any deeper into this world of candlelight and stone, let us linger for just a moment here. The soft threshold between the outer courtyard and the great arched doorway before you. Feel the coolness of the evening air at your back, the faint breath of a Highland wind, carrying with it the mineral scent of distant rain on moorland and the resinous exhale of a pine forest settling into night. And now feel the warmth beginning to reach you from within, a slow amber radiance, gentle as the memory of a summer afternoon. This channel is a place built entirely for evenings like this one. Every script, every story, every long and wandering journey through the corridors of history has been crafted with one single purpose: to help you rest. To give your mind something beautiful and unhurried to move through while the day releases its grip on you, and sleep, that oldest and kindest of travellers, finds its way to your door. If this kind of gentle immersion speaks to something in you, if you have ever wished that history could be whispered rather than shouted, then consider subscribing. Leave a comment below if you would like to spend more evenings like this one, drifting through forgotten centuries in warmth and safety. For now, there is no rush. The candles have been lit. The fire in the great hall has been laid. Someone is expecting you. Come inside. You pass beneath the gatehouse now, and the stone arch above you is so thick, so generously wide, that for 3 full paces you are held inside it, suspended between the open moorland behind you and the living warmth of the castle ahead. Look up if you wish. The underside of the arch is rough-cut granite, pale grey in the torchlight, threaded with thin lines of darker mineral that catch the flame and gleam like veins of quiet silver. Someone, centuries ago, shaped these stones by hand. You can see, if you look closely enough, the shallow marks left by iron chisels, small rhythmic grooves pressed into the rock with patience and intention. The quiet signature of a mason whose name has long since passed from every written record, but whose work stands here still, solid and unhurried as the hillside it rests upon. The portcullis above you is raised, its iron teeth pointing downward in a long row like the fingers of a sleeping hand. The metal is dark, not the bright, harsh darkness of new iron, but the soft, deep, almost velvety darkness of iron that has known decades of rain and frost, and the slow, creeping attention of rust that has been oiled back year after year, be the hands of castle servants who knew that maintenance was its own form of loyalty. You pass beneath it without thinking, and yet there is something in the body that acknowledges thickness, mass, the weight of old stone overhead, a faint animal awareness of protection, of enclosure, of being held inside something that was built precisely to hold. And then you're through, and the courtyard opens before you. It is larger than you might have expected. The outer courtyard of a Scottish castle in the 16th century was not merely decorative, It was a working world unto itself, a compressed landscape of purpose and daily necessity that hummed with the particular energy of a self-contained community. Even now, in the deep blue hour of a late evening, the space carries the residue of everything that has happened here throughout the day. The cobblestones beneath your feet are broad and uneven, worn smooth at their centres by the passage of uncountable footsteps, boots of leather, bare feet of children, the iron-shod hooves of horses led back from the stables at dusk. Each stone fits against its neighbour with the imperfect precision of something placed by hand rather than machine, and the gaps between them harbour thin lines of dark moss, soft and faintly damp to the touch, a miniature landscape of deep green living quietly between the grey. The smell of the courtyard is rich and layered in a way that no single word can contain. There is the foundational scent of cold stone, that particular mineral coolness, faintly chalky, faintly sweet, that belongs to granite and old mortar, and the perpetual slight moisture that clings to northern stone even in dry weather. Beneath that wood smoke, drifting in slow, wandering ribbons from the kitchen chimney on the far left side of the yard, thick and resinous and deeply comforting, carrying in its warmth the ghost of whatever timber was split and stacked and fed to the fire this morning. Beneath that still something animal and earthy from the direction of the stables, hay, and the warm lanolin-rich breath of horses settled into their evening stillness, and the faint, honest presence of the living creatures that share this stone world. Along the far wall, a water trough runs beneath a low iron spout. The water in it is perfectly still at this hour, its surface a dark mirror that holds a blurred reflection of the castle's higher walls, and above them the first pale stars beginning to appear in the deepening sky above Scotland. Single moth circles the nearest wall torch, a small buff-coloured creature, its wings a soft, rapid blur as it orbits the flame impatient, repeating arcs drawn by the light with an attraction older than language. To your right, the outer stables are quiet now. The wide wooden doors are pushed almost shut, and from within comes the slow sound of horses breathing, a deep, rhythmic exhalation that seems in perfect keeping with the peace of the hour. One of the animals shifts its weight, and you hear the faint scrape of a hoof on straw-covered stone, and then silence resumes its gentle dominion. Ahead, the main body of the castle rises before you in a mass of pale stone and deeper shadow. The central tower is the tallest structure in sight, 4 stories of solid granite, its walls nearly 2 meters thick at their base, narrowing slightly as they rise. The windows set into these walls are small and deeply recessed, their openings framed by cut stone lintels that cast thin horizontal shadows even in the low torchlight. From 2 of the windows on the upper floors, warm amber light is visible, the unmistakable living glow of firelight or candlelight from within, steady and golden, pressing outward against the blue-black of the evening. Wooden staircases connect the courtyard level to the upper storage galleries along the eastern wall, and you can see, if you look carefully, the shapes of barrels and clay vessels arranged along the gallery floor behind a low rail of rough timber. Provisions, stored carefully against the length of a Scottish winter that is never truly far away, even in the warmest months. Scotland in the 16th century did not forget its winters. Every full barrel, every pot of preserved meat, every sack of oats and rye was a quiet act of foresight, a hedge against the dark months when the roads turned to mud and the passes filled with snow and the castle became its own small, self-sufficient world. A cat moves along the base of the eastern wall, a long-bodied grey creature, its tail raised in a slow, confident curve. It does not look at you. Its attention is entirely elsewhere, fixed on some private business between the barrels and the wall, and it moves with the absolute, unhurried authority of a creature that has never doubted its place in this particular world. Castle cats in Tudor Scotland were not pets in any sentimental sense. They were workers, hunters of the mice and rats that threatened the grain stores, and they were valued accordingly. This one is sleek and well-fed, its coat a soft pewter colour that shifts between grey and pale blue as it passes in and out of the torchlight. You stand for a moment in the centre of the courtyard and simply breathe. The evening air is cool against your face, not cold, not yet, but carrying in its freshness the reminder that this is the north. that the hills beyond the walls are old and vast and indifferent, and that here, within these stones, warmth is something that has been carefully made and carefully kept. The great door to the main hall is ahead. It stands ajar. Tanned from within it, the golden light is thicker, warmer, more certain. There is the low sound of voices, not words you can yet make out, but the comforting murmur of people gathered together in a lit place against the dark. You take a slow step forward, then the cobblestones receive the weight of your foot without complaint. The door yields to your touch with a deep, resonant groan, not the sharp protest of neglected hinges, but the slow, dignified complaint of iron and oak that has swung open and shut 10,000 times, that knows this motion in its very grain. Tanned performs it now with the unhurried ease of long habit. The sound travels upward and outward into the courtyard behind you before the warmth of the hall reaches out and takes you in. And, in the space between those two sensations, the last breath of cool outside air and the first full embrace of firelit warmth, you understand something wordless and important about what it means to come inside. The great hall of a Tudor-era Scottish castle was the heart of the entire structure. Every other room in the building organised itself in relation to this space, measured itself against the scale of it, drew heat from it, existed in the social and physical gravity of what happened here. And so it is tonight you step across the threshold and the full dimensions of the room open before you, and they are more generous than the exterior of the building quite prepared you for. The ceiling is high, not the soaring aspirational height of a cathedral, but a solid, confident height, the height of a room that was built to hold many people and keep them warm. The beams that cross it are made from oak, enormous, dark-stained timbers, each one the trunk of a tree that was mature when this hall was built and is now seasoned to the colour of dark honey and old leather. They span the ceiling in parallel rows connected at intervals by carved secondary beams, and from the joints between them hang iron chandeliers, not the delicate ornamental chandeliers of later centuries, but plain functional things, wrought in heavy curves and fitted with a dozen candles each. Tonight, all the candles are lit. They burn in the still air of the hall with the steadiness of small settled flames. No draught reaches them here, and their combined light turns the ceiling into a warm amber-tinted sky of dark wood and moving shadow. The walls of the great hall are partly covered with hanging tapestries. These are remarkable things, and they deserve your full attention. The largest one, covering most of the north wall, depicts a hunting scene, not the frantic, violent imagery you might expect, but something rendered in the rich, muted palette of Flemish textile work, deep forest green and the brown of autumn bracken, the pale gold of a cornfield glimpsed through trees, figures in long robes and feathered caps moving through a landscape of tremendous peaceful beauty. The tapestry is old, its edges are slightly faded, and in places the colour has shifted from its original intensity towards something softer, warmer, like the memory of a colour rather than the colour itself. If you step close enough, you can see the individual threads, thousands upon thousands of them, laid in with needles by hands working slowly and carefully in some workshop far from this hall, perhaps in Bruges or Antwerp or Edinburgh, weaving a world into wool, with a patience that the modern mind finds almost impossible to conceive. The stone floor of the hall is covered, in the central area, with freshly laid rushes. This was the standard practice in Scottish and English great halls throughout the Tudor period. Clean rushes, cut from riverbanks and dried, spread across the stone in a layer thick enough to soften footfalls and trap some warmth against the chill that stone always carries in its bones. These rushes have been laid recently enough that they still carry their scent, a clean, grassy smell, faintly sweet, faintly reminiscent of the meadows and waterways where they were gathered. Interspersed with them, here and there, are sprigs of dried herbs, lavender and rosemary and meadowsweet, tucked among the rushes to perfume the air as they are trodden gently underfoot. The combined effect is a floor that breathes, that gives off with every careful footstep a small private gift of fragrance. The fireplace dominates the eastern wall, with an authority that is almost architectural in itself. It is enormous, wide enough for two people to stand side by side within its arch, deep enough that the back wall of it is partially lost in shadow, even when the fire is burning as it is now, fiercely and generously. The lintel stone above it is a single piece of granite carved along its face with a heraldic design, a shield flanked by two animals that time has worn into gentle ambiguity, their original sharpness softened by decades of heat and firelight into something more like creatures from a dream. The fire itself burns with a deep orange-red intensity, fed by logs of seasoned birch and oak that have been split to the right thickness and arranged with the careful expertise of someone who has tended fires in this hall for many years. The wood shifts and settles occasionally with a soft collapsing sound, never violent, never startling, just the quiet rearrangement of matter releasing its long-stored warmth into the room. Before the fireplace, on a wide hearthstone worn to a gentle concavity by generations of feet seeking warmth, two hounds are sleeping. They are large animals, deer-hounds, long-legged and rough-coated, their grey fur the colour of the moorland in autumn. They lie in the boneless, total relaxation of deeply sleeping dogs, one curled around itself with its nose tucked beneath its own tail, the other stretched full length with its great head resting on the warm stone, its eyes completely closed, its chest rising and falling in the slow, even rhythm of a creature with absolutely nothing pressing on its mind. Their breathing is audible from where you stand, a soft, regular sound barely louder than the crackle of the fire, but steady enough to become its own kind of rhythm in the room, a living metronome of peace. A long trestle table runs down the centre of the hall, its surface of rough-hewn oak scrubbed to a pale cleanliness. The supper things have been cleared away, you can tell this from the faint smell of tallow and food that lingers in the air, and from the few remaining items on the table's surface, a pewter jug, still half full of something, ale or cider perhaps, with a faint mist of condensation on its sides, two wooden cups left at one end, a stub of candle in a plain iron holder, its flame leaning slightly sideways toward some imperceptible movement of air. At the far end of the hall, near a second, smaller door, a young man sits on a low stool with a stringed instrument across his lap. He is not playing with any great performance in mind. He is practicing, working through a melody with the patient repetition of someone learning something by feel, his fingers finding the notes slowly, pausing, returning. The melody is modal and unhurried, something old, something that does not resolve in the way that later music would teach the ear to expect, but moves instead in quiet circles like water finding its way around a stone. You find a bench near the fire and sit. The warmth reaches your face first, then your hands, then, slowly, gradually, the whole length of you. After a long while in the warmth and amber light of the great hall, after the fire has settled twice more, and the musician at the far end has quietly closed his instrument case and slipped through the smaller door, you find yourself drawn, gently and without any particular urgency, toward the deeper interior of the castle. There is a doorway set into the north wall of the hall, partially obscured by the edge of the hunting tapestry, its stone arch low enough that you must bow your head slightly as you pass through it. On the other side, the world changes. The corridor beyond is narrow and the change in atmosphere is immediate and complete. The firelit warmth of the great hall is replaced, not by cold exactly, but by a quality of cool that is specific to stone passages in old buildings, a temperature that exists in a category entirely its own, below the ambient warmth of a heated room but above the true cold of the outside, maintained mineral equilibrium that the stone walls have been observing for centuries. It is not unpleasant. There is something almost medicinal about it, something that says to the body quietly and without drama that the world is older than you and that age has its own deep, dependable steadiness. The corridor floor is bare stone here, no rushes, no tapestries on the walls, none of the softening materials that made the great hall so generous, just stone and the particular sound that stone makes when weight moves across it. A faint, satisfying solidity, each footstep absorbed and returned in a way that feels grounded and real. The walls are close enough on either side that you could reach out and touch both of them simultaneously, and they are lit by iron sconces fitted at intervals, each one holding a single candle, whose flame in this enclosed space with its subtle, steady movement of cool air burns with a slight, perpetual lean. The candle flames all tilt in the same direction, as though listening to something at the end of the passage, as though the stone itself breathes in a direction too slow and vast for human perception. The stone of these interior walls is different from the exterior granite, a softer, paler sandstone in places, cream-coloured and slightly rough to the touch, its surface marked with the fine parallel lines of the saw or chisel that shaped it. In other sections, the original rough-cut stone was never dressed at all, and the wall presents itself exactly as the quarry produced it, uneven, organic, lumpy with projections and hollows, its surface alive with texture. Run your fingers along it as you walk. Beneath your touch, the stone is neither warm nor cold in any absolute sense. It has settled into the temperature of this corridor, which is the temperature of the earth from which it came, and it holds that temperature with perfect indifference to the seasons passing outside. Here and there the wall shows the shadows of old features, a shallow rectangular recess where perhaps a small devotional image once stood, its painted plaster long since gone, leaving only the ghost of its dimensions in the stone. Series of small iron hooks driven into the wall at shoulder height, currently empty but worn smooth at the tops from long use, their purpose no longer entirely clear. Section where the mortar between two courses of stone has been repointed at some point with material of a slightly different colour, a pale line tracing the join like a scar that has healed well and cleanly. At the end of this first corridor, the staircase begins. It is a turnpike stair, a tight circular spiral built within a round turret, rising through the floors of the castle in a helix of stone steps that are each slightly different in their dimensions, worn to varying depths depending on where the foot most naturally falls. The steps are narrow at their inner edge, just a few inches of stone meeting the central newel post, and widen toward the outer wall where the tread is broad enough to place your entire foot flat. You ascend by keeping toward the outer edge, your right hand trailing the curved outer wall, your left occasionally touching the newel post for reassurance. The sound of the staircase is its own particular music. Your footsteps do not echo exactly, there is not enough space for a true echo, but they are returned to you fractionally, absorbed and released by the curved stone walls in a way that makes each step feel slightly doubled, as though someone is walking just half a breath behind you. It is not alarming. It is, if anything, companionable, the castle's own way of acknowledging your presence within its body. Through a narrow slit window cut into the outer wall of the turret, a window barely wider than a hand's breadth, designed originally as an arrow loop and only secondarily as a source of light, you glimpse the outside world as you climb. You see a vertical slice of it, a strip of dark blue Scottish sky, a thin band of hillside, a distant edge of pine forest that is now almost entirely absorbed into the night. A single star is visible through the slit, holding its position with the patient brilliance of something that has been burning far longer than these walls have stood. It is gone as you take the next step, replaced by stone, and then it is just the spiral again, and the candle you have carried from the hall, and the close, cool quiet of the turret. On the landing between the first and second floors, the staircase opens briefly into a small square chamber, no more than 3 meters on each side, with a low-arched ceiling and a single deeper window on the eastern face. This chamber has no obvious function recorded in any history, you know, but its purpose declares itself in other ways. There is a wooden bench built into the wall beneath the window, worn smooth with long use. The stone floor in front of the bench is slightly more hollowed than elsewhere, though many people over many decades have stood here or sat here and looked out through this window at whatever the eastern view held. Perhaps it was simply a place for rest, a place to pause between levels, between the public life of the hall below and the private life of the chambers above, and breathe for a moment, and look at the landscape, and remember that the castle exists within something larger than itself. You sit on the bench for a moment, the wood is cool and smooth beneath you. Through the window, wider than the arrow loops, fitted with thick greenish glass in small leaded panes, the outside world is a dim, beautiful blur, dark hillside, pale sky, the suggestion of water somewhere in the valley below, catching the last of the evening's ambient light in a thin silver thread. The candle in your hand burns straight and steady. The castle holds its breath around you. Enormous and old, and quietly, it's entirely awake. The second floor of the castle holds a different quality of silence than the great hall below. Down there, the silence is always a temporary thing, an interval between sounds bounded on all sides by the possibility of the fire's collapse, the hounds shifting weight, the musicians returning melody. Up here on the upper floor, the silence has settled in with the permanence of something that belongs. It fills the low corridor completely, from the stone floor to the plastered ceiling, pressing gently against the closed doors on either side with the comfortable authority of a long-established resident. The corridor up here is slightly wider than the one below, and the ceiling is plastered rather than bare stone, a smooth cream surface, slightly yellowed from years of candle smoke, marked in places with faint circular stains where the rising heat of candles placed directly against the wall has left its slow, patient signature. The floor is covered here with a long runner of woven wool, a flat woven carpet in the Scottish manner, its pattern of interlocking diamond shapes in deep red and dark green worn to a softer version of its original self, the colours muted now, more earthy, more like something found in nature than something deliberately dyed. It muffles your footsteps entirely, and the sensation of moving soundlessly through this corridor, of your presence in it being absorbed rather than announced, creates a particular feeling of intimacy with the space, as though you have been trusted here, though the corridor has decided to keep your passage its own quiet secret. The first door on the left stands open, and the room beyond it is unmistakably a private solar, the withdrawing chamber that would belong to the lady of the castle, or to the highest-ranking female resident of this particular household. The word solar comes from the Latin for sun, and these rooms were traditionally positioned to capture the best light of the day through their wider windows. Now, at this late evening hour, no sunlight remains, but the room still holds a quality of brightness that sets it apart from the corridors. 3 candles burn in a standing iron candelabrum near the window, and a small brazier of glowing coals occupies one corner, its surface radiating a steady rose-coloured warmth. The furnishings of this solar are more refined than anything in the great hall. Chair with a high carved back stands near the brazier, its seat cushioned in faded green velvet, the pile of the velvet worn to near smoothness on the armrests and the seat's centre, but still thick and rich at the edges, still carrying in its texture the memory of its original luxuriance. Footstool before it is covered in wool embroidery, a dense, intricate pattern of stylized flowers and leaves worked in wool of gold and blue and rust red, stitched in the long winter evenings of several seasons by hands that brought patience and colour to the work in equal measure. On a small side table, a piece of embroidery work in progress lies beside a shallow wooden box of silks. The embroidery is stretched on a small frame of wood, a pillowcase or a portion of a larger cloth, worked in a fine linen ground fabric. The design already half completed, a vine of leaves and small stylized birds, the birds rendered in tiny cross-stitches of grey and pale terracotta, each one no larger than a thumbnail, perfect in its miniature completeness. The silks in the box are wound on small cards, each a different colour, saffron yellow and the deep blue of woad, a pale sage green, the warm brown of oak bark, red so dark it is almost the colour of dried rose-ships, and they are arranged in their box with a care and tenderness that says something about the person who placed them there, about the seriousness with which this work was held. Narrow bed occupies the alcove at the far end of the room, built into the wall with its own carved wooden surround. The mattress is deep, stuffed with wool and covered with linen sheets that have been pressed smooth, and over it lies a coverlet of woven wool in a plaid pattern, the colours deep and saturated, a dark heather purple, a forest green, a thin line of pale gold. The pillows at the head are piled in layers, a sleeping arrangement designed for comfort in a room that, even with its brazier, could become cold before morning. The curtains around the bed are drawn back during the day and can be pulled shut at night. A heavy fabric, dark and plain, their function not decorative but practical. They would create a small sealed body-warmed enclosure within the larger room, a nest within a nest, private darkness within the castle's general darkness. On the windowsill of the solar's single wide window, a small group of objects has been placed with the deliberate casualness of daily use, a pottery cup containing a dried sprig of something fragrant, rosemary perhaps or southernwood, its grey-green leaves still intact, still releasing, when the air stirs, the faintest breath of their sharp, medicinal sweetness. Beside it a small thick-paged book, its cover of pale leather softened with handling, a strip of darker ribbon marking a place somewhere in its middle third, and beside the book a smooth river stone, just a stone, oval and pale, worn by water to a perfect hand-filling weight, placed there perhaps for no reason at all or for every reason. You do not go into this room, it is not yours to enter, but you stand at its threshold and receive it. The warmth of the brazier, the honey-golden light of the candles, the smell of beeswax and the faint ghost of rosewater and the deeper undertone of old wool and polished wood. You receive all of it as a gift, as you would receive the sight of a lit window in a distant house on a cold night, with the particular gratitude that belongs to the contemplation of another person's shelter. Further along the corridor a door is firmly closed, and beneath it the faintest thread of firelight is visible. There is the very quiet sound of someone inside, not speaking, not moving exactly, but present, the subtle acoustic displacement that a human being makes in a room simply by being alive in it. You continue past. The corridor turns, and ahead, another stair leads up to the topmost floor, where the wind, even through these walls, can occasionally be heard, not as a threat, but as a reminder. A long, slow, northerly sound, pressing against the castle's high stones with the patient interest of something that has all the time in the world, and knows it. There is a small door at the top of the final staircase, iron-banded oak, taller than your shoulder, so that you must bend as you push it open, and beyond it, the night receives you. The battlements of the castle's central tower are a different world entirely from the enclosed warmth below. Up here the air is fully itself, cool and clear, and carrying in its body all the various distances it has travelled before arriving at this particular height above the Highland valley. There is the cold mineral smell of wet stone, the grass and heather breath of the open moorland to the north and east, the faint coniferous resin of the pine forest on the slopes below, and beneath all of these, harder to name, the pure clean scent that belongs to night air in a high place, a quality of openness and of altitude that opens the lungs and quiets the mind simultaneously. You straighten up outside the door and look. The sky above Tudor-Era Scotland was a sky that modern eyes have almost entirely lost access to. In the 16th century there was no electric light anywhere on the face of the earth, not in the valley below, not in the distant towns, not on the roads between them. The only lights that burned in the landscape at night were the lights that human hands had made and maintained with great effort. The candles and hearth fires inside buildings, the occasional bonfire on a hillside, the rare lantern on a road. Beyond these small warm points of human intention, the darkness was absolute, and into that absolute darkness the sky released everything it had. Tonight, the sky above the castle is almost completely clear. A few thin clouds move from the west, long stretched shapes, pale against the deeper blue-black, travelling at a height and speed that makes them seem to belong to a different layer of time than the solid settled earth below. Where the clouds are absent, the stars are almost beyond counting. They do not appear as they appear from a modern city, as a thin scatter of the very brightest, isolated against a washed-out sky, but in their true ancient abundance, layers upon layers of light, the very nearest and brightest burning with a steady individual brilliance, and behind them, smaller and softer, the vast populations of the farther stars, and behind those still the great smeared brightness of the Milky Way itself, which arches from horizon to horizon in a sweep of pale luminosity so wide and so full that it reads not as a collection of individual lights, but as a single, continuous brushstroke of something impossibly generous across the dark. The person who stands here most evenings, one of the castle's watchmen, keeping the slow night hours in rotation with two companions, has learned to read this sky the way a reader learns to read a page. He knows the names of the major stars, though his names for them are different from the Latin names that scholars use. They are the names in Gaelic that his grandfather taught him, names that describe each star's color and behavior in the language of a people who have watched this sky from these hills for longer than any building here has stood. He knows which stars rise in which season, and which are the stars to navigate by, and what it means when particular stars are obscured before others, and what weather will follow from each combination. He carries this knowledge easily, without ceremony, the way a craftsman carries the knowledge of his trade held in the hands and the body as much as in the mind. The battlements themselves are made of the same granite as the rest of the tower, but up here, exposed to decades of rain and wind and frost, the stone has a weathered quality that makes it feel almost alive. Its surface is rougher, more three-dimensional, encrusted in places with flat rosettes of pale grey lichen, each one a slow-growing organism that has been expanding outward from its original spore at a rate of perhaps a millimetre per year. Some of these circular crusts now wide enough to cover a hand. They are dry tonight and slightly rough under the fingertips, and if you are very still and the air is very clear, you will smell them faintly, a clean, cold, slightly mineral smell, the smell of stone plus time plus life, which is a combination that does not have a single word in any language and perhaps does not need one. The crenellations of the battlements, the raised portions between the gaps, the merlons and the embrasures alternating in their steady rhythm around the top of the tower, create a series of natural frames through which the landscape below is visible in sections. Through one gap, the dark mass of the pine forest on the eastern slope, its canopy a single continuous black shape against the sky, the individual trees lost in the collective. Through the next, the valley floor, where the river is a barely visible thread of something lighter than its surroundings, a faint, pale gleam that says water even in near-total darkness. Through the gap beyond that, the far hillside, a long, dark slope that rises to a ridge against which a few stars are visible just above the horizon line, stars that appear to be resting on the hill's spine as though they belong there, though the hill has gathered them from the sky and set them along its crest for safekeeping. The wind up here is gentle tonight, a long, even pressure from the northwest, neither cold enough to be uncomfortable nor still enough to be unnoticeable. It moves through the embrasures with a low, patient sound, not the sharp whistle of a strong wind through a narrow gap, but something rounder and more continuous, a breath held at a steady pitch that changes slightly as the wind's direction shifts by degrees. It moves through your hair with a cool, unhurried touch, and it carries from somewhere far below and to the northwest the very faint sound of water, a stream running over stones perhaps too distant to identify precisely, just present enough to be heard in the intervals between the wind's own voice. You rest your hands on the top of the nearest merlon. The stone is cool under your palms, deeply, evenly cool, holding the temperature of the long day's wind and the approaching night with equal composure. You feel the slight roughness of the lichen against your skin, the organic irregularity of weathered granite, the honest weight of something that has been here for a very long time. Below, in the courtyard, a torch has burned low and is being replaced by one of the castle's servants, you can see. If you look down through the darkness, the small, warm glow of a lantern moving across the cobblestones, unhurried and purposeful. The courtyard cat sits on the lip of the water trough, watching nothing or watching everything, in the way that cats always seem to be doing both at once. The stars burn on. The castle breathes around you. The night is immense, tanned generous, tanned perfectly still at its centre, and you are held, safe and small and entirely at peace, inside the greatest vault that has ever been built, the open dark above a clear Scottish night. The kitchen of the castle is the warmest room in the entire structure, and it carries the warmth in the way that all truly warm rooms do, not as a property of the air alone, but as something absorbed into the very fabric of the space, pressed deep into the stone walls and the smoke-blackened ceiling and the wide, worn flagstones of the floor by decades of continuous fire tending. You feel it before you arrive, a gradual intensification as you descend from the upper floors and pass through the service corridor that connects the main body of the castle to the kitchen outbuilding, a slow increase in temperature that the body welcomes instinctively, that begins first in the face and hands, and then extends inward, unwinding something held tight without your awareness of it. The kitchen at this hour is winding down from its long day of labour, but it is not yet still. The great hearth, an open fireplace wide and deep enough to roast an entire ox, though tonight it holds only the embers of the afternoon's cooking fire, and a single iron pot suspended above them on a heavy chain, gives off a low, dense heat, the kind that radiates in waves you can almost see. The coals in it are orange and rose and the deepest red, settled into a bed of pale grey ash, glowing steadily with the particular even generosity of coals that have passed beyond the dramatic phase of burning and arrived at something quieter and more giving. The smell of the kitchen is extraordinary in its complexity. Every meal that has been prepared here over the course of this day has left its signature in the air, layered upon the signatures of all the meals before it, and before those, and before those. The top note tonight is roasted meat, beef or venison, you cannot be certain, with the caramelized, slightly sweet edge that comes from fat rendered over a slow fire. Beneath that, something herbal and warm, thyme and bay perhaps, simmered into the pot that still hangs above the embers, its contents now reduced to a rich, fragrant broth that shifts occasionally in tiny, almost imperceptible movements as the last heat keeps it just below a simmer. Further beneath still, a foundational layer of wood smoke and bread, the honest, starchy, deeply comforting smell of grain that has been transformed by heat. The smell of loaves baked in the clay oven set into the wall beside the main hearth, now cooled and empty, interior still breathing the ghost of this morning's baking. 2 kitchen workers remain at this late hour, tidying the kitchen toward its nightly state of order. One is a broad-shouldered woman of perhaps 40 years. Her hair wrapped in a plain linen coif, her sleeves rolled above her elbows. She is scrubbing the great wooden surface of the main preparation table with a brush and a paste of fine sand and salt, a method of cleaning that leaves the wood pale and slightly granular and smelling of the sea. She works in long, even strokes, pressing her weight into the brush with the confident economy of someone who has done this same task so many hundreds of times that her body carries out the motion without requiring much direction from her mind. She hums something as she works, a low modal melody barely audible above the gentle scraping of the brush that rises and falls without any apparent beginning or end, as though it has been playing inside her all day and only now, in the relative quiet of the kitchen winding down, is audible to anyone outside herself. The second worker, a young man perhaps 16, with the lean, angular face of someone who is still deciding what his adult appearance will be, is stacking clean clay pots on the shelves that line the eastern wall. The shelves are deep and wide and loaded with the remarkable variety of vessels that a working castle kitchen required, pots in graduated sizes, some glazed in a muted honey yellow, some plain and rough, stacked in careful towers, iron ladles and wooden spoons arranged in a tall jug of fired clay, row of shallow dishes for cooling, several covered crocks sealed with waxed linen tied in place with string, their contents preserved and patient. The young man works with the slightly exaggerated care of someone who is trying not to make any noise, conscious of the hour, and every now and then there is the soft, low knock of clay on clay as 2 vessels touch in the act of being nested together, a sound so ordinary and particular and domestic that it seems to come from a depth within everyday life that is almost sacred. On the wide hearthstone before the main fire, a cat lies in absolute thermal contentment, not the grey courtyard cat, but a different one, orange and white. Pottest, its body pressed flat against the warm stone in the full-body surrender of an animal that has found the perfect spot and intends to stay there until circumstances force a change. Its eyes are slitted nearly shut, reflecting the ember glow in 2 thin horizontal lines of amber light. Its purring is a continuous, barely audible vibration that seems less like a sound the cat is making than a quality the hearthstone itself has acquired, a resonance of deep satisfaction that the warm stone conducts upward and outward into the air. From the wooden rack above the hearth, bundles of dried herbs hang in tied clusters, their stems bound with lengths of rough twine and suspended upside down in the way that draws the remaining oils down toward the leaves and preserves them longest. There are many plants here, Rosemary in thick, dark green bunches, still fragrant even in their dried state. The pale ghost of dried meadowsweet, long stems of lavender gone grey, bundles of dried sage and thyme, a larger tied bunch of something unidentifiable except by smell, which offers, when the warmth of the fire touches it, a sharp and slightly camphorated fragrance that opens the passages of the nose and fills the lungs with the memory of a summer hillside. On a shelf near the door, the day's bread, 2 round loaves and 1 long flat barley bannock, is set to cool completely before being covered with a cloth. The bread is the colour of a pale gold autumn field, its top crust split and roughened by the oven's heat into a texture of ridges and small irregular domes, its underside flat and smooth where it rested on the oven floor. If you broke a corner from one of these loaves, which you will not because it is not yours, the interior would show you a crumb of close-set small bubbles, white as chalk at the centre, cream-coloured toward the crust, and it would offer in the breaking the faintest ghost of warmth, and the scent of grain and yeast that is perhaps the oldest and most universally recognised smell of human civilization. The woman at the table slows her scrubbing, rinses her brush in a pail of water and straightens. She looks around the kitchen with the slow, proprietary gaze of someone assessing the state of a domain under her care. She nods once, not to anyone, just to herself, a small private acknowledgement that the day has been dealt with, and then turns toward the fire and reaches up to adjust the iron pot's position on its chain. The kitchen settles further. The embers dim almost imperceptibly toward their nightly resting state. The purring of the orange cat continues, warm and unbroken. There is a door at the kitchen's western side, low and plain, fitted with a simple iron latch, that opens directly onto the kitchen garden, and it is through this door that the kitchen woman stepped a few minutes past with a covered pail she needed to empty. She has gone back inside now, but you slip out through the same door and find yourself in a space that the castle holds within its walls like a private secret. The kitchen and herb garden, enclosed on 3 sides by the castle's lower outbuildings, and on the 4th by a stone wall of its own, perhaps 2 meters high, that cuts the garden off from the outer yard. At night, the garden is extraordinary. During the day, it is a working space, a place of organized growing, of cutting and harvesting, and careful tending, of weeding on hands and knees in the soft earth between the raised beds. But at this hour it has undergone the daily transformation that gardens undergo when the light leaves them. The colours have gone, replaced by the full palette of grey, from the near black of the soil to the pale silver of the stone wall, and in this grey world the garden's other properties come forward. The shapes of the plants are clarified and simplified, the smells rise without competition. The sounds of the garden, the small organic sounds that belong to growing things in still air, become audible. The beds are arranged in a pattern that is both practical and, in its own unpretentious way, beautiful. Long rectangular raised beds, framed by wide planks of weathered timber, are laid in 2 parallel rows with a path of flat stone between them, a path barely wide enough for one person to walk without the plants on either side pressing against their legs. Each bed holds a different family of herbs, and they have grown into the planting season's full expression, some tall and faintly visible even in the dark, as vertical shapes against the grey stone wall, others low and dense, spreading in flat, fragrant mats across the surface of the dark earth. The smell of the herb garden at night is different from its daytime character. The heat of the day has passed, and with it the more volatile top notes, the bright, sharp aromas released by sunlight on warm leaves. What remains is deeper, more rooted, more mineral in quality. The rosemary is still present, but slower now, a thick, resinous warmth rather than the immediate bright sharpness of a pinched leaf. The mint, in the bed at the near end of the left row, has a cooler, greener presence in the night air, its scent drifting in layers close to the soil surface where the plant is densest. From somewhere in the right-hand bed, a plant you cannot immediately identify in the darkness releases something soft and sweet and faintly peppery, southernwood perhaps, or lemon balm, catching in the slight movement of air that the garden funnels from the north with a gentle, unpredictable regularity. In the far left corner of the garden the well stands. It is a simple working well, a circular wall of unmortared stone, perhaps waist high, its cap a wooden frame fitted with an iron handle, and a rope wound around a wooden axle. The stone of the well's circular wall is ancient, older than the garden, older than this section of the castle, perhaps the oldest human-made feature in this entire enclosed space. It is darker than the surrounding stone, stained by decades of splashing water to a deep, slightly greenish grey, and along its inner face, where the moisture is constant, a thin film of moss and algae covers the stone in a living velvet coat of the deepest green. You approach the well and rest your arms on its lip. The stone is cold here in a way that is different from the cool of the upper corridors. This is the cold of deep water, of earth that does not receive the sun's direct warmth, of the underground world that holds the water table in its dark, patient keeping. Leaning over the well's edge, you can see nothing of the water itself. The darkness inside is complete, but you can smell it. A clean, cold, mineral smell, perfectly distinct. The smell of water that has filtered down through meters of rock over years, that has never seen sunlight, that carries in its composition the memory of the rain that fell on this hillside in seasons long past and pressed slowly downward through the dark until it reached this stillness. If you drop a small stone over the lip, and there are small stones here lying on the ground near the base of the well where they have been deposited over time by the absent-mindedness of workers drawing water, and listen, you will count 3 full seconds before the sound returns, a small, clear, entirely satisfying plunk, and then a brief, bell-like resonance in the enclosed column of stone, and then silence, as the water closes back over the disturbance and resumes its perfect horizontal rest. Along the wall behind the well, a climbing plant has been growing for so long that it has become part of the wall rather than a separate thing attached to it. Its woody main stems are as thick as a thumb, their bark pale silver and papery, adhering to the stone with the grip of long rootlets pressed into the mortar at intervals all the way up to the wall's coping. In summer, this plant produces flowers, small creamy clusters that nod in the wind and smell of something between honey and old roses. Tonight, in the absence of flowers, it offers only its leaves, small, oval, dark green, each one laid flat against the stone like the impression of a leaf, still and perfect. Single candle lantern hangs from an iron bracket fixed to the garden wall above the well, a service light, placed there so that water could be drawn safely in the dark hours. Its glass is old and imperfect, green-tinted and slightly wavy, the kind of glass made by glass blowers working with the tools and knowledge of this century, glass that distorts what is seen through it very slightly, that gives the world a soft, subaqueous quality. The candle inside it burns with that particular perfection that enclosed flames achieve absolutely still, its shape like a small elongated teardrop, its light falling in a soft circle on the well's stone surface and reflecting in the moisture there as a second, smaller flame. You stand in the garden for a long, unhurried time. The smell of rosemary drifts past you in a slow wave, carried by a shift in the night air. Above the garden wall, the stars are still fully present, the same vast assembly that was visible from the battlements, closer now somehow, or perhaps simply more intimate, viewed through the frame of these old walls and this old garden and the particular breathing quiet of a working space at rest. Somewhere in the herb beds, cricket, or something like a cricket, makes a thin, persistent sound. Just one note, repeated at even intervals, patient as the stone itself. In the east wing of the castle, tucked between the storage rooms and the lower chambers of the old domestic block, there is a chapel. It is not large. The interior is perhaps 12 meters long and 5 meters wide, its ceiling low and vaulted in the Romanesque manner, its stones older than most of the surrounding structure. It was here before the Tudor extensions, before the current family's ownership of this place, before the political upheavals that reshaped Scotland's religious life. It has witnessed in its small, stone-arched way centuries of change, and it has absorbed all of it with the imperturbable tranquillity that belongs to spaces devoted, in whatever form, to the contemplation of something larger than the self. You enter through a narrow doorway hung with a curtain of dark wool, heavy and soft. It Protestant its weight meaningful against your hand as you push it aside and you step from the corridor's functional plainness into a space that operates on entirely different principles. The chapel is lit by candles, not the utilitarian candles of the corridors, functional and matter-of-fact, but candles placed with intention, tall altar candles in iron candlesticks on either side of the simple stone altar at the east end, smaller votive candles clustered on a shelf set into the north wall, a dozen of them, some burned low, some freshly placed, their flames an irregular assembly of individual lights that together create a general glow of considerable warmth. Two more in wall sconces flanking the narrow east window, whose opening, even at this hour, admits a thin rectangle of navy blue night sky that the candlelight cannot entirely warm. The effect of all this candlelight in this enclosed, low-ceilinged, stone-walled space is unlike candlelight anywhere else in the castle. Here the light is purposeful and contemplative. It reaches only part way up the walls before the vaulted ceiling curves away from it into soft darkness. It catches the surfaces that are nearest to it with great specificity. The polished brass of the altar cross, whose surface throws back the flame in a dozen curved fragments. The white linen of the altar cloth, laid fresh and pressed flat with the careful propriety of a tradition maintained without question. The carved wood of the prayer desk positioned before the altar, oak surface worn smooth and pale at the top where generations of elbows have rested and hands have been folded, and it leaves everything beyond these immediate objects in a shadow that is not threatening but gentle, shadow that holds the space's full dimensions without revealing them entirely. The smell of the chapel is one of its most distinctive properties. Incense has been burned here earlier in the day, a practice that, in the complex religious landscape of Tudor-Era Scotland, existed in various forms depending on the household's own position within the ongoing theological transformations of the 16th century. Whatever form the practice took here, the resinous ghost of it remains, a sweet, slightly smoky, ancient smell, darker than wood smoke, more complex than beeswax alone, carrying in its character the memory of liturgical traditions stretching back beyond Scotland, beyond the Norman influence. The very early church in its stone cells and rough plastered walls and long communal contemplations, it has merged with the beeswax smell of the candles, beeswax being in this period the material of quality candles rather than the tallow used in everyday functional lighting, and the result is a scent that the body recognizes as significant without being able to explain why. It is the smell of centuries of human attention directed toward the same small space, the smell of the same act of focus performed, with varying degrees of sincerity and various degrees of distraction by the many different people who have knelt or stood here before you. On the north wall, between the votive shelf and the entrance, a carved panel of stone depicts a Madonna and Child in the rounded, solemn style of early medieval carving, the figures simplified, frontal, rendered with a dignity that comes not from naturalism but from the complete confidence of the maker's intention. The Madonna's face is worn. The finest details of the carving have been softened by time and perhaps by the touch of hands over years, the way holy images in often visited places are smoothed by devotion, but the essential composition is still clear, still affecting in its own quiet way. The child in her arms looks outward, not with the naturalness of a real infant, but with the absolute stylized attention of a figure that has been carved to look at the space it inhabits for as long as the stone endures. Before the votive candles, on a low, flat stone step that serves as a kneeling place, someone has recently been present. You can see in the slight disturbance of the dust on the step, in the freshness of the two topmost votive candles, in the slight warmth still present in the air near the shelf, the traces of a recent presence. Who they were and what they carried with them into this small candle-lit space, what worry or gratitude or fear or love they brought and set down here in front of these small flames, you do not know and cannot know, and the not knowing is itself a form of respect, recognition that the interior life of another person, especially in its most private moments, is a country to which you hold no visa. The altar at the east end is plain and entirely dignified, a stone shelf covered in white linen, bearing the brass cross and two tall candles and nothing else. Above it, the east window, a single round arched opening without glass, covered instead with a wooden shutter that stands slightly ajar, admitting a thin slice of the night outside. Through this gap, the air moves barely, just enough to cause the altar candles to lean infinitesimally to the left, in unison for a moment, and then recover. The cross catches this movement in the variation of its reflection, a momentary trembling of the candlelight's image in the polished brass, and then stillness again. You sit on the single wooden bench along the south wall, a long bench without a back, worn and solid, and you sit in the chapel's particular quality of quiet, which is a quiet made of accumulated silences, the silence of every prayer that was ever offered here and then released, the silence of every night that has passed over this building since the first stone was laid. The candles burn. The cross gleams. The night air moves through the shutter's gap in a thin, clean breath. You are not required to believe anything in particular, to know anything in particular. You are only required to be here. This light, this old and patient space, tanned to breathe. In the corner of the second floor's eastern range, accessed by a short passage that branches off the main corridor behind a door that is easy to miss, its surface is flush with the plaster, and its iron handle is small and plain. There is a room that the castle's household refers to simply as the writing room. It is, in the language of the period, a scriptorium in miniature, not the great hushed hall of monks bent over illuminated manuscripts, but a small functional chamber fitted out for the administrative and personal correspondence of a noble household. The room is lit by 3 candles tonight. Though it is not currently occupied, the candles were left burning, perhaps by accident, or perhaps by the custom of a person who knew they would return, and did not want to come back to full darkness. They sit in a heavy iron holder placed at the centre of a wide wooden writing desk, and their combined light falls across the desk's surface with a warm, unapologetic directness that makes everything on it immediately visible and interesting. The desk is broad and solid, built to the dimensions of serious use, not decorative intent. Its surface is scarred and darkened with years of ink, small drips that have dried to a brownish-black finish, faint smears at the near edge where a hand has rested repeatedly, thin lines drawn by the drag of a pen held at varying pressures. There is a quality to this ink-marked surface that is deeply evocative. It is the record of thought made physical, the trace of the process by which the invisible content of a human mind was converted into visible marks on parchment or paper, and the desk has absorbed the overflow of that process. There's been stained by it the way a cook's apron is stained by the overflow of 100 meals. On the desk's surface, to the left of the candle holder, a piece of work is in progress. It is a letter begun on a sheet of pale, faintly creamy paper, its surface smoother than parchment, heavier and less flexible, made by hand in a paper mill that transformed rags of linen and cotton into sheets of material for writing. The letter is half-written, the text ending mid-sentence in the manner of something interrupted or paused for consideration. The handwriting is a careful, trained italic, the humanist script that had been spreading through Europe from Italian workshops across the 15th and 16th centuries, and which the educated households of Tudor Scotland were adopting as the mark of a certain degree of cultural awareness. The individual letters are formed with the deliberate grace of a person who learned this hand from instruction rather than by nature. The descenders on the letters loop downward with elegant length. The upstrokes are thin and the downstrokes slightly broader, where the pen's nib pressed more firmly against the page, and the whole has the quality of something between art and function that good handwriting in this period invariably possessed. Beside the letter, a small ink pot sits in its purpose-made hole in a wooden inkstand, a turned piece of wood with 2 round openings, one for the primary ink and one empty and slightly stained for a secondary colour, perhaps red, which was used in some documents for headings or emphasis or the rubricating of initial letters. The ink in the primary pot is a dark, glossy black iron gall ink, made from oak galls and iron sulfate dissolved in water, a formula in use for centuries and still the standard writing medium of this period. The ink has a faint smell of its own. Something between vinegar and tannin, metallic and slightly sharp. The smell of the chemical reaction between plant matter and iron that produces, when dried on a surface, one of the most permanent marks that human hands have ever made. Quill pen lies on the desk, its point toward the right, resting across the edge of a shallow dish. It is a grey goose feather, stripped of its barbs along the lower half of the shaft for comfortable holding, its tip cut and split in the careful manner of the quill cutting art, the point shaped to a clean, slightly wedged shape that produces the variation between thick and thin strokes that gives this kind of writing its particular character. The end of the nib is slightly split from use, not yet in need of recutting but approaching it, and there is dried ink in the fine gap between the two sides of the split, a hairline of black that catches the candlelight and glints very faintly. Along the wall to the right of the desk, shelves carry books and documents in the organized abundance of a working household's administrative life. The books are bound in boards covered with leather, pale tan calfskin or the slightly rougher, darker surface of pigskin or sheepskin, and they stand on the shelves at slight angles, leaning against each other with the informal closeness of frequently consulted objects. Their spines show various treatments. Some have their titles written in ink on a paper label attached to the spine, others are unmarked, their identity known to the person who uses them without need of external indication. One large volume lies flat, stacked beneath a smaller one, a household account book perhaps, too wide for the shelf's depth. Beside the books, a collection of rolled documents is stored in a wide ceramic jar of plain, unglazed earthenware. The rolls are papers and parchments tied with narrow ribbon, thin strips of undyed linen, and they carry the slight curl of their storage without urgency, each one a record of some past transaction or correspondence, folded into the jar like the memory of a day's business into the running account of a household's years. On the windowsill of the single window, a small object catches the candlelight and returns it with a quiet precision. A small brass seal, circular, its handle a plain cylinder of turned bone. If you picked it up and pressed its face against the candlelight, you would see the design in negative, a heraldic device, the family's mark, used to press into wax on correspondence and documents as a mark of authenticity and identity. The seal is worn at its edges from handling. The bone handle has the warm, polished quality of an object that has been picked up and set down thousands of times, that has been held in a palm while the mind considered words, that has made its small circular impression in red wax on letters sent to places near and far, carrying the household's identity outward into the world. The candles on the desk burn on in the empty room. The inkpot waits. The half-finished sentence on the letter waits. Whatever thought was in the mind of the person who paused here and stepped away has its space held for it. Patiently, the white expanse of the remaining page. There is a room adjacent to the solar that was referred to in household inventories of this period as the garderobe, a word whose original meaning encompassed not merely the closet for waste but the room for the storage of clothing, the guarding of robes. In practice, the ammonia fumes from the former function were thought to preserve wool from moth damage, and so the two purposes coexisted in the linguistic and practical life of the Tudor household without embarrassment, as practical matters tend to do when they serve a genuine need. But the room you enter tonight is the dressing room, the private chamber adjacent to the main sleeping room in the upper east wing, and it is the latter function, the guarding of robes, that gives it its character and its particular absorbing interest. The room is not large, but it is very full. Every wall is given over to storage, deep wardrobes of carved oak, their doors fitted with iron hinges and small locks of considerable craftsmanship, stand against the two longer walls. Between them, a series of wooden pegs driven into the plaster hold various outer garments in a loose informal assembly of hanging fabric. The ceiling above these hanging garments is lower than in the adjacent rooms, and the air here has a quality that is immediately distinctive. The smell of stored clothing, which is one of the most evocative and layered smells that the human environment produces. It begins with wool, the fundamental material of this entire wardrobe. Wool in this period was not a single simple material but a wide family of textiles, from the roughest frieze to the finest broadcloth, each with its own texture and weight and characteristic smell. The broadcloth in the open wardrobe to your left, folded and stacked on deep shelves in lengths of dark blue and deep russet and a warm brownish black, has the particular smell of quality wool that has been properly fulled and finished. Dense and warm, faintly lanolin-rich even in its finished state, carrying in its fibres the deep biological smell of the animal whose coat it was, transmuted by many processes into something civilized and beautiful, but not entirely severed from its origin. Over the wool cedar. Several of the wardrobe shelves have thin boards of cedarwood laid along their surfaces, and the closets contain small sachets of the dried herb mixture used to deter moths, pennyroyal and wormwood, and dried lavender tied in linen bags and tucked into the folds of stored garments. The lavender has the most assertive presence, a purple, slightly medicinal sweetness that is entirely characteristic of stored clothing in any prosperous household of this period. It is a smell that carries its own particular form of memory, not your personal memory, but a deeper one, a cultural memory of the inside of wardrobes in old houses, of the care taken over fine cloth by people for whom fine cloth was genuinely valuable. The garments themselves deserve unhurried attention. On the pegs along the south wall, a series of outer garments hang in patient waiting. Gown of deep green woolen cloth, one of the woman's gowns, a formal garment, its fitted bodice and full skirt cut in the style of the mid-16th century, its sleeves long and slightly puffed at the shoulder in the manner fashionable in this period. The fabric catches the candlelight with a slight sheen that comes not from any added finish but from the quality of the weave itself, the tight, fine interlocking of threads that produces a surface capable of reflecting light in a subdued, self-possessed way. The colour is a deep, slightly greyish green, the colour of pine trees in winter, of deep water over moss, achieved with plant dyes perhaps weld and woad combined, or the dye obtained from certain lichens gathered from the rock faces of this very hillside. The garment hangs with the weight of real cloth, not the limp, insipid fall of synthetic fabric, but a genuine architectural fall that describes the garment's shape even in its resting state. Beside the green gown, a shorter garment of darker fabric, a riding cloak perhaps, its hem still carrying, at the inner edge, a slight stiffness of dried mud from the last use. This detail is instructive. In the 16th century, as in all centuries before the age of modern road surfaces and modern transport, travel meant mud. Even the most carefully maintained roads in Scotland, and many were not maintained carefully at all, were earthen tracks that the rain turned to mire, and the frost cracked to irregular ankle-testing surfaces. The mud on this cloak's hem is not a sign of neglect, it is simply the trace of the world outside having been engaged with, the landscape signature on the garment of the person who moved through it. On the shelves of the second wardrobe, linen items are stored in neat stacks, the long linen shifts that served as the innermost layer of clothing, and also as nightgowns, their surfaces smooth and slightly cool to the touch, smelling of the lye soap in which they were washed, and the fresh air in which they were dried. Linen in this period was maintained with considerable care and effort. Washing it required significant labour, and it was treated as a valuable household resource, mended repeatedly before replacement was considered. Some of these shifts show at a corner or a cuff the small, neat stitches of a mend made sometime in the recent past, invisible from a small distance, apparent only upon close examination, the work of someone with small, precise fingers and good eyes, and a philosophical acceptance of the fact that beautiful things require tending. On the dressing table, a flat-topped chest of oak, with a hinged lid serving double duty as storage and surface. A small mirror is propped, a convex disc of polished metal, its frame carved with a simple repeating design, its surface reflecting the room in a slightly warped and golden form, the candlelight entering the reflection expanded and softened, the room made rounder and more intimate in the curve of the metal. It is not a perfect mirror by any modern measure. The reflection it offers is approximate, impressionistic, closer to a suggestion of a face than a precise rendering. But it is useful, and it has been used. The surface is slightly marked by the breath and touch of someone standing close over it in the mornings. checking the adjustment of a collar or the placement of a pin. On the table beside the mirror, a bone comb, its teeth fine and closely set, warm amber in the candlelight, a small pot of some cosmetic preparation, its lid sealed with a disc of waxed cloth, and a single pearl pin, lying on the bare wood with the absolute stillness of something set down with care and purpose. The room smells of lavender and cedar and old wool, and the particular, quiet intimacy of personal things stored carefully against their next use. Every large household in Tudor-era Scotland operated according to a hierarchy of management that extended downward from the lord or lady of the castle through a series of functionaries whose titles and responsibilities were well defined by custom and long practice. At the centre of this management structure, responsible for the daily operation of the entire domestic establishment, stood the steward, a person of considerable social standing and practical authority, whose role required equal parts administrative intelligence, social tact, physical endurance, and the particular human skill of knowing what each of the dozens of people under their charge was capable of, and what each of them needed in order to function well. Tonight the castle's steward makes his final round of the evening, a nightly practice that was as much ritual as practical necessity, though it served genuine practical ends as well. He is a man of perhaps 50 years, compact and deliberate in his movements, dressed in the plain but well-made clothing of a senior servant, a dark woolen doublet, good wool stockings, leather shoes that have been kept in reasonable condition. He carries a lantern, a metal-framed horn lantern, its sides of thin-scraped cattle horn translucent enough to allow the candle within to cast its light outward in a warm, diffuse glow, and he walks the castle's passages and rooms in a route that has been refined over years into the most efficient possible sequence for observing everything that needs to be observed. His purpose tonight, as every night, is threefold. First, to check the fires, to ensure that every hearth fire is properly banked for the night, not extinguished, because the effort of relighting a fire from cold stone was significant, and the castle needed warmth to continue building through the night, but reduced to a state of controlled smouldering that would maintain overnight without either dying out or escaping the hearth. This meant raking the coals into a compact heap, covering them with a thin layer of ash from the day's burning, and in some cases adding a final, heavy log of slow-burning wood that would sustain the fire's life through the small hours. The steward checks each hearth with the practiced eye of someone who knows exactly what a properly banked fire looks like and can assess in a moment whether any given fire has been seen to correctly. Second, to check the candles. Any candle left burning without necessity in an unoccupied room was both a waste of expensive material and a genuine fire risk. Then the steward moved through the building extinguishing such candles with a small brass snuffer that he carried at his belt, a cone-shaped instrument that pressed over a flame, extinguished it cleanly and completely without the scattering of wax that blowing produced. The castle at night should have light where light was needed in the occupied rooms, at the key corridor intersections, at the entrance points, and only darkness where darkness could be safely maintained. The steward knew this geography precisely and restored it, room by room, to its correct evening configuration. Third, and perhaps most importantly, to verify the security of the building, that the main gates were secured with their heavy iron bolts, that the portcullis chains were properly seated, that the outer doors of the secondary buildings were latched. This was not, in the Highland Scotland of the mid-16th century, a merely formal exercise. The political landscape of this period was genuinely complex. Clan allegiances shifted, disputes over land and cattle required armed response, and even a well-established noble household needed to take the ordinary precautions against the possibility of unwanted visitors whose intentions were unclear. The steward did not approach this aspect of his rounds with fear or urgency, but with the calm, professional attention of someone who took safety seriously as a practical matter of household management. As he moves through the castle tonight, the steward passes through the same sequence of spaces you have already moved through, and in passing through them he leaves his own quiet trace. He pauses at the great hall's fire, crouches to add the slow-burn log he has carried up from the kitchen store, straightens and examines the result with a brief confirmatory look, He moves along the corridor, extinguishing a candle in an empty wall sconce with a single practiced gesture. The soft hiss of the snuffer, a curl of smoke, and the corridor becomes 1 degree darker. He climbs the turnpike stair without holding the wall, confident in the steps from long familiarity, his lantern swaying slightly with the motion and casting rotating shadows across the stone. On the upper floor he pauses briefly at the door of the solar, listens for a moment. The silence within tells him what he needs to know, and moves on to check the window fastenings in the writing room and the guest chambers. These are wooden latches fitted with iron catches, simple but effective, and he tests each one with a firm upward push before moving to the next. In the kitchen, he exchanges a few quiet words with the woman who is still at work finishing the final stage of the day's cleaning. The words are brief and without ceremony. A question about the morning's provisions, an answer, a nod. No unnecessary conversation, no small talk at this hour. The steward does not need to assert his authority here. It is understood by all parties without assertion, in the same way that the organization of a well-functioning household is understood without constant articulation. It simply exists, in the ordering of the tasks and the timing of the rounds and the quiet efficiency with which things get done. He emerges from the kitchen into the courtyard for the final external check of his route. The night air meets him, and for a moment he stops and looks up, not at anything in particular, but in the way that people pause when they step outside at night, receiving the sky and the air and the particular quality of the evening's darkness as a brief, restorative intake before returning to the enclosed warmth of the building. The stars are very bright, he knows them by the names he was taught, and he observes without particular thought or ceremony that the hour is advancing toward midnight. He can read this in the sky's rotation with the same automatic skill with which a modern person reads a clock face. He crosses the courtyard with his lantern, checks the portcullis chain and the great gate's bolts, notes that the night watchman on the tower is in his place, the distant glow of a small fire visible on the battlement, and turns back toward the main door. He pauses at the door's threshold for a moment, lantern in hand, and looks back across the courtyard. The torches are low, the stables are quiet, the cat is gone from the water trough. He is satisfied. He enters, and the great door closes behind him with its deep, familiar voice. In the last hour before the household retires fully to its sleeping arrangements, there is a gathering of the castle's internal community in the great hall, not a formal assembly, not the structured social occasion of a feast or a reception, but the informal, domestic convergence that happens in well-ordered households when the day's work is done and the warmth of the fire is at its most inviting, and the company of other people after the separate solitudes of individual tasks is welcome. Perhaps 10 or 12 people have drifted in over the course of half an hour. They sit on the benches and stools arranged in a loose semicircle before the fire, or on the long bench against the south wall, or on the hearthstone itself in the manner of the 2 young kitchen boys who have arrived last and sat closest to the fire with the strategic directness of the young. The hounds are still here, still in their same places on the hearthstone, still asleep, though one of them has opened an eye at the arrival of the kitchen boys and assessed the situation and decided that no action was required and has gone back to its own dreaming. The atmosphere in the great hall at this hour is the particular, irreproducible atmosphere of a community at rest. It exists in the combined effect of many small things. The warmth, which has deepened in quality as the day's cold has been fully driven from the hall and the stones themselves have absorbed enough heat to begin radiating it back. The collective sound of people breathing and occasionally speaking in low voices and shifting on their seats. The smell of the fires burning, which at this hour has taken on the richer, darker quality that a sustained fire develops as it moves through different stages of its wood. And the social ease that comes from people who know each other well, who have shared the routines and contingencies of a working life in close quarters over years, and who hold that shared history in their relationships without needing to make it explicit. The young musician from earlier in the evening is here again, and this time he plays in earnest. The instrument across his lap is a lute, a pair-bodied stringed instrument of the type that had arrived in Scotland from the continent over the preceding century and had become, by the Tudor period, the prestige instrument of educated households. Its body is made from ribbed strips of pale wood, maple perhaps, or fruit wood, curved into the rounded, slightly flattened shape that gives the lute its particular acoustic character. A warm, clear sound, full in the middle frequencies, with a natural decay that fades quickly at the edges and leaves a silence between notes that is itself musical, itself part of the phrase. The music he plays is not loud. It was never designed to fill a hall. The lute is an intimate instrument built for rooms of this size, for evenings of this kind. Its volume is calibrated for conversation range, for the distance between a player and the nearest listener, and it fills the hall not by overpowering the other sounds in it, but by threading through them, by becoming part of the overall texture of the room. The melody tonight is a pavan, one of the slow, stately court dances of the 16th century, its rhythm measured and deliberate, its phrases long and arching before they resolve and begin again. He plays it with the careful attention of a musician who is both technically engaged and emotionally present. You can see in the slight movement of his expression as certain phrases reach their resolution that the music means something to him beyond the exercise of skill. After the first piece, and without any particular announcement, one of the older women of the household begins to speak. She is a senior lady's attendant, grey-haired, and possessed of the comfortable authority that comes from long service and wide observation. She speaks in Scots, the language of the Scottish lowlands, related to but distinct from the Gaelic of the Highlands, its vocabulary rich with words that English does not have and cannot quite replace, and she is telling a story. It is a story about this castle, or a castle very like it, set in a time before this generation's memory. The details are not verifiable. The story has the character of something that has been told and retold and adjusted over years into the shape that serves it best, its original historical truth long since digested into something more useful. Narrative that explains why certain things are done in certain ways, or that attaches a particular meaning to a particular corner of the building, or that preserves in the amber of a good story the name and character of someone who would otherwise be entirely lost. This is how households remember. This is how communities carry their own history, not in written records primarily, but in the spoken accounts passed from older to younger around fires exactly like this one, in halls exactly like this one, on evenings exactly like this one. The listeners receive the story with varying degrees of attention according to their ages and their familiarity with it. The kitchen boys have heard it before. You can tell from the way they listen with confident recognition, ready for the parts they know are coming, settling into those parts with satisfaction. But they listen again anyway, because a good story heard again is not the same story heard again. It is the same story made slightly different by everything that has changed in the listener since the last time, and the good parts are still good, and the surprising parts are still a little surprising. When the story ends, it does not end with any particular ceremony. It simply arrives at its natural conclusion and rests there, and the silence that follows it is a comfortable silence, the silence that good stories leave, which is not an absence but a fullness, the sound of a room digesting something nourishing. The musician plays another piece, shorter this time. Simple tune in a brighter mode, Tet's melody straightforward and easily followed. The kind of tune that enters the memory without effort and can be hummed afterward without knowing where it came from. One by one, the gathering begins to thin. Someone takes a candle and says good night and goes up the stair. Then two more. The kitchen boys are spoken to by the steward with a look that communicates, without words, that this is late enough for their age, and they go. The hounds rouse themselves when the old woman rises from her bench, following her toward the smaller door with the devoted, fluid ease of animals who have organized their world around a particular person's movements. The fire is lower now, settled to the steady, generous glow of its banking. The musician plays a few last notes and then lets his hand rest on the strings, stopping them. Then the hall is quiet. Single candle burns on the mantelpiece. Protestant tits flame perfectly still. The rushes on the floor breathe their faint herbal exhale. The heavy tapestry on the north wall holds its hunting scene in the near dark, the figures in it frozen in a landscape of perpetual, beautiful afternoon. The hall is at rest. The castle is at rest. The night has fully arrived. There is something in the nature of stone that the mind returns to in the late evening hours, when the business of the day has concluded and the darkness outside has deepened to the point where the world beyond these walls has largely ceased to be a practical consideration. Stone endures in a way that is qualitatively different from the endurance of other materials. Wood endures too, but it carries within itself the biological process of its own eventual dissolution. It rots, it warps, it feeds the life of other organisms. Metal endures, but it rusts, it corrodes, it transforms. Stone, in its characteristic forms, simply persists. The same molecular structure that was present in the granite of these walls, when the first stone was quarried from the hillside and shaped and lifted into place, is present in it now, centuries later, and will be present in it centuries hence. The stone has no agenda about this. It does not persist out of any intention, it simply is, and being so completely and without effort, it endures. This quality of stone, its profound, uncomplicated persistence, gives old stone buildings a relationship with time that is unlike the relationship that any other human construction maintains. To sit in a room whose walls are of stone laid in the 16th century is to occupy a physical space that those walls have been occupying without interruption since the day they were finished. Nothing has intervened between then and now, except more time. The stone has experienced every day of those centuries in unbroken continuity, every summer and winter, every drought and flood, every fire and freeze, every birth and death and ordinary Tuesday that the household contained. The stone was present for all of it, and it is present now, and it makes the gap between then and now feel narrower than it has any logical right to feel. Sitting in the great hall tonight, with the fire low and the candles guttered to their last inch, and the castle's human community spread through its upper rooms in sleep, you can feel this quality very directly. The wall at your back is the same wall that was at the back of every other person who has sat in this spot, on some version of this bench, before any fire that burned in this hearth. The specific individuals change, generation upon generation of them have passed through this space, each one as fully themselves as you are, each one carrying the specific weight of their own particular life and time. But the wall remains. The wall receives them all equally, without preference or judgment, with the absolute democratic indifference of something that has nothing to prove and nothing to lose. This is, when you rest inside it rather than against it, a profoundly comforting thought. The persistence of stone says something about the persistence of the structures that human beings build for themselves. Not merely the physical structures, but the social and emotional ones. The patterns of care and household management, the evening gathering around a fire, the music played in the last hour before sleep, the story told by the oldest person in the room to the youngest. These things too persist with a consistency that transcends the individuals who perform them. No one alive in this castle tonight invented the practice of gathering before a fire in the evening. They received it as they received the building itself from the people who were here before them, who received it in turn from the people who were before them, and so on backward through time, to the first human beings who discovered that fire in the dark was better shared than experienced alone. The particular genius of places like this castle, and this is a thought that deserves to be held slowly, turned over in the mind like the smooth river stone on the solar windowsill, is that they accumulate all of this living into their fabric. The building that has been continuously inhabited for generations is not merely a container for the activities of its current residents. It is, in some meaningful sense, a record of all the activities it has ever contained. Not an intentional record, not a written one, but a record nonetheless, pressed into the wear patterns of the stair treads and the smoothed surface of the bench ends, and the soot marks above the candle sconces, and the hollow in the flagstone before the fire, where feet have rested for warmth over the course of years too many to count. The scholar in the writing room leaves their mark in the ink-stained surface of the desk. The musician leaves their mark in the scuff on the hearthstone where the stool has been pulled and replaced over many evenings. The child leaves their mark in the height of a scratch on the plaster of the kitchen wall, made not with any particular intention, but in the way that children leave their mark everywhere, accidentally and abundantly, by virtue of simply being present with full physical engagement in the world. None of these marks is significant taken alone. Together accumulated over the depth of a building's occupied life, they constitute something that is more than a record. They constitute a kind of presence, the ongoing quiet company of all the people who are ever here. This thought, which might in another mood or another hour lead toward melancholy, toward the weight of so many vanished lives, leads here tonight, in this firelit warmth, toward something else entirely, toward gratitude, toward the particular and specific gratitude that comes from being inside an old place at night, when the darkness outside makes the warmth inside more real by contrast, and the stone walls press close and present and solid, and the fire breathes its last slow warmth into the room. You are inside a vessel that has held human life for a very long time. All the fear and warmth and boredom and love and routine that constitute the actual texture of human existence. Not the grand historical events, not the documented decisions of powerful people, but the ordinary daily substance of being alive in a body in a place. All of this has accumulated in these walls and these floors and these worn specific surfaces, and it is here still in the way that warmth is here still in stone long after the fire has been reduced to coals. The candle on the mantelpiece has burned to a stub. Its flame is very small now, barely a point of light, but it is still steady, still perfectly itself, throwing the faintest shadow of the iron candlestick across the pale stone of the mantelpiece in a long, thin, slowly shifting line. Outside, the wind moves across the battlements, and the stars pursue their ancient, indifferent arcs above the pine forest and the valley, above the moorland and the distant hills. Inside, the stone holds its warmth, the fire rests, the castle breathes. You are held in all of it, as gently and completely as the river stone is held in the palm of a hand. To understand the candlelit world, the world of this castle tonight, the world of every night in every household across Tudor Scotland, it is necessary to understand darkness, not the approximate relative darkness of a modern night, where light pollution reduces the sky to a pale, washed greyness and the indirect glow of street lamps and windows ensures that true darkness is never really achieved even in the most private interior. But the actual, complete, unreduced darkness that existed before any form of artificial electric illumination, the darkness that is the natural condition of the world beyond the circle of whatever flame a human being has been able to kindle and maintain. In such a world, light is not the default condition of the inhabited evening. Light is the achievement. It requires fuel, tallow or beeswax or oil, all of them expensive, all of them produced with significant effort, and it requires tending because flames need to be managed, not simply switched on and left. A candle burns for a finite time and then requires replacement. Fire needs fuel added and arrangement maintained. The relationship between people and light in the pre-industrial world was a relationship of active partnership, a daily negotiation between human need and natural scarcity that gave the experience of artificial light its particular character. What this means in practice in a room like the great hall of this castle at this hour is that the light is precious, not in a sentimental sense but in a literal one. It has a cost, and that cost is known, and the light is used accordingly. You do not leave a room blazing with candles if no one is in it. You carry your light with you, a single candle, perhaps in a small handheld holder, and the pool of light you inhabit moves with you through the building, and the rooms you leave return to their natural state of darkness. And the darkness is entirely normal and is not experienced as a deprivation. The psychological effect of this relationship with light is subtle and pervasive, and it shapes the experience of the interior world in ways that are worth attending to. When the light you have is a single candle or a fire, and these are the only things between you and the surrounding dark, the light becomes the world. The small, warm circle of visibility created by a candle is not experienced as an inadequate approximation of full illumination. It is experienced as sufficiency, as completeness, as home. The darkness beyond the candle's reach is not threatening in this context. It is simply the rest of the world, at rest, requiring no attention at this moment. The specific quality of candlelight, The warmth of its colour, the gentle organic variation of its movement, the way it renders human faces, is not incidental to the experience of interior life in this period. It is constitutive of it. Candlelight flatters stone and wood and fabric in a way that has no equivalent in any artificial light source developed since. It brings out the warmth in pale stone, the richness in dark wood, the depth and complexity of colour in woven fabric. Tapestry seen by candlelight is a different object from the same tapestry seen in daylight, its colours warmer, its shadows deeper, the scenes depicted in it more alive and present in the dancing light than in the honest uniform illumination of the sun. And human faces by candlelight carry a different quality of expression and presence. The eyes catch the flame there is always, in a candle-lit face, this point of light in each pupil, like a small fire held in the gaze. And the planes of the face are rendered in the amber gold of the light and the deep warm shadow of the surrounding dark, in a way that gives every face, regardless of its particular beauty or plainness by daylight, a quality of depth and significance. Every face looks meaningful by candlelight. Every face looks as though it contains something worth knowing. This may be why the experience of conversation in a candlelit room has a particular intimacy that is difficult to reproduce in other lighting conditions. The circle of light is small enough that conversation partners are held close within it, equally illuminated, equally visible, equally present to each other. The darkness beyond the circle creates a perimeter that defines the conversation's world. Everything important for the duration of this exchange is here, within this light. What is beyond it can wait. There is also something important in the impermanence of candlelight, in the knowledge always present at some level of awareness that the light is consuming itself. A candle is in the process of ending from the moment it is lit. This is not a melancholy observation, it is simply true, and the truth of it gives the light a quality of presence that a permanent light source cannot have. You pay attention to a candle in a slightly different way than you would pay attention to an electric bulb. You are aware of it as a living thing, sustaining itself on a resource that is finite, and this awareness, subtle, not anxious, makes the light itself more vivid, more real, more worth attending to. In the small hours of a Tudor night, when the household is asleep and the fires are banked and the last candles are guttered to their final stubs, the castle returns to the condition that it occupies for most of the long Scottish night, darkness so complete that the distinction between one room and another, between wall and floor and ceiling, is erased. In this darkness the building becomes purely tactile, known only by touch, by the feel of wall and floor and the memory of space laid down in the body through long familiarity. The stone continues in the dark, exactly as it continues in the light. The castle holds its shape. The fire in the hearth breathes its small red breath, and the darkness holds all of it with the same gentle impartiality that it holds the hills and the river and the stars above the pine forest. The candle stub on the mantelpiece has extinguished itself while you thought. The room is lit now only by the fire's glow, a deep, rose-red illumination, pulsing almost imperceptibly with the breath of the embers. It is enough light. It is, fact, exactly the right light, the light of a room winding down toward rest, the light that the body recognizes as the signal for sleep, the ancient light of the ember phase, which has been the last light of the human evening for longer than any building in the world has stood. Beyond the castle walls, the land continues. This is a truth so obvious that it seems barely worth stating, and yet in the warm, enclosed, self-sufficient world of the castle interior, it is a truth that takes on a particular weight when you return your attention to it, when you remember deliberately that the stone and fire and candlelight and human community of these rooms exist within a landscape of tremendous scale and age and indifference, and that this landscape does not pause or alter its own quiet proceedings out of regard for anything that happens within these walls. The river in the valley below, the same river you could barely discern from the battlements, the thin silver thread in the dark, runs tonight as it runs every night, as it has run every night for centuries before this one, It is a Highland river, coming down from the moorland and the high slopes above, gathering itself from the springs and small burns that feed it all along its course, moving with the particular, purposeful character of water that has spent its early life among high stones and carries in its current the memory of steep descents and narrow channels, and has now arrived at the broader valley floor and found a more measured pace that is nonetheless entirely committed to its destination. The sound of this river, if you were standing in the valley rather than within the castle walls, would be the defining sound of the landscape at night. Not loud, exactly, but pervasive, a continuous, varied sound, different at every section of the bank, deeper in the bends where the current presses against one side, lighter and quicker in the shallow sections where the water moves over a bed of rounded stones in that particular clear, musical way that shallow water over stones produces, a sound that occupies a middle frequency range that the human ear finds particularly easy and comforting to receive, that slows the breath and relaxes the muscles and communicates, below the level of conscious thought, the message that water is nearby and moving and clean and that everything is for the moment essentially all right. The pine forest on the slopes above the valley is engaged tonight in its own long, slow processes. Trees in a forest are never still, even on calm nights. There are too many animals moving through the understory, too many birds shifting on their roosts, too many small organisms conducting their invisible business in the needle-carpeted ground beneath the trees. But on a still night, as this one largely is, the forest gives an impression of stillness that is one of the most beautiful and complex things in the natural world. The tall, straight trunks of the Scots pines rise from the dark ground into the darker canopy, their bark a deep, warm orange red at the base where it is thickest and most deeply furrowed, shading to a paler, more delicate orange toward the upper branches where the bark is thinner and flakes in irregular patches to reveal the fresh, bright orange beneath. In daylight, this colour is remarkable, one of the most vivid natural colours of the Scottish landscape. In moonlight it is paler, more silver, but the texture of it remains, that deeply three-dimensional, almost architectural furrowing that is the pine tree's own specific signature. The moorland that extends to the north and west of the castle is the oldest landscape in view, older than the forest in geological terms, its peat formed over thousands of years of accumulated plant matter compressing under its own weight into that particular dense, dark substance that is Scotland's own specific record of its biological history. Walking on this moorland in daylight, which the castle's residents do for practical purposes, gathering heather for thatch and bedding, cutting peat for fuel, moving between settlements on the ancient tracks that cross the high ground, is to walk on something that is both landscape and archive, the surface of a living system that is simultaneously the preserved record of all the living systems that came before it. At night, the moorland is a different experience again. Its surfaces, the dark heather, the pale grass of the sedge beds, the occasional grey rock outcropping that breaks through the vegetation like the back of a sleeping animal, are absorbed into the general darkness in a way that makes the ground feel continuous with the sky, the horizon between them unclear, the whole extending in all directions as a single dark vastness through which the stars burn with even greater intensity for the absence of any interruption. In this landscape, the castle is a small thing. Seen from the moorland on a clear night, it would appear as a compact cluster of pale stone and warm-lit windows, its towers rising above the tree line on the hillside, its courtyard lights flickering in the still air, a human gathering, a lit place in the dark, comprehensible and finite. The scale of the surrounding landscape makes it clear without any sentiment or drama what human habitation is in its fundamental nature, a gathering of light and warmth and mutual care in the face of the beautiful, indifferent dark, a small, bright, chosen concentration of human presence in the middle of a world that does not require it. This is not a diminishing thought. Quite the opposite. It is one of the thoughts that restores perspective most completely and most kindly. To understand the smallness of the lit human world against the dark landscape is to understand the value of what has been made here, the fire, the food, the gathered company, the music, the embroidery, the careful letter, the chapel's small cluster of flames, These things are small in the scale of the moorland and the river and the forest and the stars. They are also in the scale of what a human life requires to be livable, absolutely everything. The wind tonight moves across the moorland in long, barely perceptible waves, a pressure more than a sound that bends the heather stems fractionally in unison and then releases them and moves on, carrying nothing but air and the faint mineral smell of the high ground and the cold, clean, nothing smell of a Scottish night that has not yet decided whether it will rain. And within the castle walls, separated from all of this by 2 meters of granite laid with lime mortar, by careful hands in a century already distant, the last embers of the great hall fire pulse their steady rose-red warmth. The hounds breathe. The tapestry holds its hunting scene in the dark. The land turns imperceptibly toward morning. Somewhere on the high moorland, the first bird, a curlew perhaps that most haunting of northern birds, its long bill and its long descending call belonging entirely to this landscape and no other, shifts on its roosting place in the heather and prepares without hurry for the slow approach of the dawn that is still hours away. The castle endures. The river runs. The stars burn on. Among all the thoughts that a night spent in an old building can produce, one of the most persistent and most quietly moving is this, that the vast majority of the people who have lived and worked and slept and woken in this castle have left no record that history has bothered to preserve. The lord of the castle appears in documents, land grants, legal proceedings, correspondence with other powerful people, and his name is there, attached to events and decisions, and the formal transactions of property and power. The lady of the castle appears occasionally in marriage records, in inventories, in the documentary traces of dowries and jointures. Perhaps a steward or a particularly notable servant appears in household accounts. But the kitchen woman who scrubs the table every night, whose hands are rough from lye and whose humming fills the cooling kitchen after supper, she has left no record. The young man who stacks the pots on the shelves with excessive care, trying not to make noise, he has left no record. The watchman on the battlements who reads the stars by Gaelic names his grandfather taught him, he has left no record. This is not, in the conventional historical reckoning, considered a loss. History has largely made its peace with the idea that the documentation of events is necessarily selective, that the records that survive tell us about the people who had the power or the education or the social standing to generate written traces, and that the vast majority of human experience in any given period is simply unrecorded and therefore, from the perspective of conventional historical inquiry, inaccessible. But consider what this means in practice. It means that the full reality of this castle on this particular evening cannot be reconstructed by any method of historical research. The documents can tell us the name of the family, the composition of their estates, the political alliances they maintained, the price of grain in the accounts. They can tell us, in aggregate, the kinds of rooms a castle of this size and period typically contained, the materials they were typically furnished with, the practices of daily life that were typical for a household of this standing. But the specific individual texture of this evening, the particular melody the musician worked through, the story the old woman told, the exact configuration of the herb bundles in the kitchen rafters, the way the grey deerhound tucked its nose beneath its tail, all of this is entirely lost. It happened, it was real, and it is gone in a way that no archive can recover. This is not a melancholy observation, or not only that. It is also an invitation to extend your imagination and your attention backward into the past with something more than the detached curiosity of a researcher, to meet the unnamed people of history not as background context for the lives of the documented few, but as the primary reality of what a past time actually was. The castle was not primarily the residence of its lord. It was primarily the working world of the dozens of people who kept it running, who grew the food and cooked the food and served the food and cleaned up after the food, who maintained the fires and tended the horses and mended the fabric and kept the records and stood watch through the night and sang to themselves while they worked. and worried about their children, and were frightened sometimes, and were bored sometimes, and were content sometimes in the particular, unremarkable, not quite nameable way that human beings are content when they are warm and fed and among people they know. The stone of this castle holds the trace of all of them in the ways we have already noticed. The wear patterns, the ink stains, the finger marks, the concave hearthstone. But the stone also holds something that is harder to articulate, the simple fact of their presence. Every room in this building was formed by the use that was made of it, and that use was made by people whose names we do not have and whose faces we will never see. The solar is the shape it is because someone lived in it and arranged it and used it every day for purposes that mattered to them. The stair is worn where it is worn because many people ascending and descending in the ordinary course of their days place their feet in the same natural spots, preferring the same part of the tread without thinking about it, their collective unconscious habit carving a slow concavity into the stone over years. There is a kind of memorial in this if you're willing to receive it, not the formal monumental memorial of a statue or an inscription. Those are for the named, the documented, the historically significant in the conventional sense. But a memorial of use, of endurance, of the quiet persistence of a stone that received them and held their trace and is still here, still available to receive the attention of someone willing to slow down enough to look. In many traditions of this period, this kind of attention to the unnamed had its own forms. The prayers said in the chapel were not only for the named members of the household, they extended in the memorial prayers of the period to all the souls of the faithful departed. A liturgical gesture of inclusion that gathered in, with deliberate generality, everyone who had lived and died before the current congregation, regardless of whether their names were remembered or their lives were documented. This was a form of historical consciousness, however theological its framework, a recognition that the past contained far more human life than any record could contain, and that this unreduced surplus of past humanity deserved acknowledgement. The old stone walls of this castle are, in their own material way, doing something similar. They have absorbed the full reality of everyone who lived here, not selectively, not only the documented and the named, but all of them. And they hold that absorption in the specific, particular, unrepeatable way that this specific building holds it, distinct from every other old building in the world by virtue of the specific, particular lives that happen to be lived within it. The candles are very low now. The fire is down to its deepest red. The castle is as quiet as it has been all evening, and the quality of the quiet has changed again. It is deeper now, more complete. The quiet of a building in which most of the people are asleep, and the remaining wakefulness is held in small pockets. A watchman here, a feeding mother there, someone lying with their thoughts in the dark. The unnamed woman in the kitchen laid down her brush. The young man set the last pot on the shelf. The musician closed his instrument case and walked upstairs in the dark. They were all here. They are here still. The way that the past is always still here, in the stone, then the wear, then the scent of old wood and beeswax and the deep, patient cold of granite holding the warmth it has been given. We do not know their names. We do not need to. We know they were here, and that they were real, and that the warmth they made and kept in this place has not entirely left it. That is enough. It is, perhaps, everything. The castle is sleeping now. Not all at once. It never happens all at once in a building with this many rooms and this many people, but gradually by increments so small and so gentle that no single moment could be called the beginning of sleep, only the end of wakefulness, which is a different thing and arrives with a different quality of motion, like the tide coming in across a flat, wide beach. You do not see the moment when the beach becomes the sea, only the slow, patient, inevitable advance of the waterline. Then at some point you look, and the beach is gone, and the water is there, and it seems as though it could never have been otherwise. The rooms have dimmed one by one. The writing room was first, its candles attended to by the steward's careful snuffer. Then the chapel, where the last votive candle burned down of its own accord to the flat disk of its final pool of wax and went quietly out. leaving the space to the darkness and the faint starlight through the open shutter and the lingering smell of beeswax and old stone and a century's accumulated prayer. Then the solar, where the brazier's glow faded through rose to orange to the last dim red of cooling coals, and the curtains of the bed were drawn, and the person within became part of the silence rather than a source of motion in it. Now the great hall is the last lit space in the main body of the castle, and the light in it is the light of the fire's final phase, a deep glowing red, pulsing very slowly, barely moving, the kind of light that does not so much illuminate as presence itself, as a warmth, a colour, a signal of ongoing life. The hounds are asleep before it. The rushes on the floor are still, their small herbal exhale so slow now that it is barely perceptible. The tapestry on the north wall is in full darkness, its hunting scene suspended in a night within the night. The fire breathes in, out, very slowly, the way breathing slows when a body is releasing the last vigilance of wakefulness, letting down the guard that the alert mind maintains all through the day, surrendering the 100 small tensions that the body holds in readiness for whatever the day might require. The fire breathes the way you breathe now, reading or listening to these words in the warm dark of your own room, in your own time, which is far from this castle in every measurable way, and somehow, in this moment, not so far at all. Your shoulders have dropped. Notice that. The small constant effort of holding them up has released itself, and they have found their natural resting position, which is lower and softer than the position they hold throughout the day. Than the difference between those two positions, the working height and the resting height, is one of the body's simplest and most complete indicators of its state. The shoulders are down, the body knows. The fire breathes. The hounds breathe. The castle breathes. Somewhere in the upper rooms, the castle's sleeping community is distributed through their various beds and arrangements with the unremarkable completeness of people who go to bed every night in the same places and sleep every night with the same particular quality of sleep that belongs to people who work hard with their hands and bodies throughout the day and arrive at night genuinely spent, genuinely ready for the repair and restoration that sleep offers. This is not a small thing. The sleep of people who have earned their tiredness through physical work has a depth and a generosity that is one of the most reliable forms of bodily gratitude available to a human being, the body rewarding the demand made upon it with a rest proportional to that demand, deep and dark and genuinely restoring. The watchman on the battlements is awake. This is his purpose, and he maintains it with the practiced discipline of someone who has learned to hold wakefulness through long, cold, quiet hours, by keeping his attention moving, by making small regular circuits of the battlement walk, be attending to the sky and the distant landscape with the active, directed observation of a person with a task rather than the passive, drifting attention of someone merely waiting for sleep. But even he, in the pauses between his circuits, leans against the cold stone of the parapet and lets his eyes rest on the long dark shapes of the hills and the bright scatter of the stars, and something in him, something below the level of active thought, receives the beauty of the view and rests in it, and for those moments he is both watchman and simply a person in a high place on a clear night, in the fullness of all that is. The river in the valley runs on, it does not sleep. The water that is in it now is not the water that was in it an hour ago, it has moved on downstream toward its meeting with a larger river, and then another, and eventually the sea. The water that is in it now came down from the high moorland tonight, and it carries in its cold body the memory of its descent through heather and rock and narrow gorge. It will not be here in an hour either. The river is always itself, always named the same, always occupying the same channel, and always entirely new, every moment the water always moving, always fresh, always in the process of arriving and departing simultaneously. This is one of the ways that the world rests while remaining, in the deepest sense, awake, by moving through itself, by cycling, by the great turning processes of water and wind and season that do not stop but return, that do not end but come around again, that give the world its quality of endlessly renewed freshness within a continuity of pattern that the mind recognizes as reliable, as trustworthy, as the substance of a world that will still be here in the morning. The fire in the great hall breathes. In, out. The coals are settling toward ash now, that final pale stage of wood's transformation, when everything that was combustible has been released into heat and light and smoke, and what remains is the mineral skeleton, the grey, powdery, beautiful remains of a tree that became a fire, that became warmth, that became the comfortable temperature of this room on this night. The ash will be raked out tomorrow and spread on the kitchen garden, returned to the soil, taken up again by the herbs in their raised beds, entering the next cycle of the growing season with the equanimity of matter that has learned all its forms and is entirely willing to become any of them again. The castle holds the night. The night holds the castle. The hills hold both of them in their wide, dark, ancient embrace. Your breath is slow. The room you are in, your room, your time, your particular arrangement of walls and warmth is receiving you now, the way the castle's rooms receive every person who rests in them, without condition, without expectation, with the absolute, uncomplicated generosity of a shelter that exists for no other purpose than to hold you safe while the long dark passes. The fire breathes. The hounds breathe. The stars burn overhead in their long, slow arcs. Let your eyes close. Let the castle keep its watch. There is one candle left. You may not have noticed when all the others went out. They departed one by one in the slow economy of a household's nightly conservation, each extinction too small and too gradual to constitute an event. But this one remains, a single tallow candle in a plain iron holder on the wide sill of the great hall's deep-set window, placed there by someone, for some reason perhaps simply because the sill was there and the candle was in hand and the window's thickness made a natural resting place, ledge that said without words, "Set things down here and they will be safe." The candle is short now, it has been burning for hours, and its original height, 4 inches perhaps or 5, has been reduced to barely an inch of wax above the holder. The wax around it pooled and resolidified in gentle organic curves, the way water shapes itself around an obstacle in a slow stream, finding the form that gravity and temperature and the particular character of this specific wax on this specific night, in this specific draught-free alcove, have together determined. The flame is small, not weak. It burns with a steady, complete certainty that belies its diminutive size, but small, a point of warmth and light proportional to the fuel that remains, giving everything it has and no more, which is its nature, which has always been its nature. The window beside the candle faces east. This is where the light will come from, when light comes again. It is not yet visible. The darkness beyond the thick green glass is complete. The eastern sky as deep as it will be until the very final moments before the approaching dawn. But the window's orientation is a kind of promise, structural fact, that the castle's builder incorporated with the knowledge of someone who understood that east-facing windows did not only admit morning light, they announced it. They created the experience of the day's beginning as a physical event in the life of the room. But that is hours away yet. In the time that remains between this candle's last burning and the first grey softening of the eastern sky, the castle will complete its night in the full, unhurried depth of its sleeping. This time the small hours of a Scottish night in the 16th century, when the fire has banked itself to embers and the last candle is at its final inch, and the building has given itself over entirely to the slow processes of darkness and warmth, and the restoring unconsciousness of its sleeping residents, this time is its own. It belongs to no one's waking hour. It exists in the interval between one day's end and the next day's beginning, in the seam of the world's turning, and it has a quality that is unlike any other quality of time. It is quiet with the completeness that only the deepest night produces, not the relative quiet of an evening that still holds the potential of activity, voices returning, doors opening, footsteps on the stair, but the absolute quiet of a night that has exhausted all of those possibilities and arrived at something simpler and more fundamental. The castle at this hour is sound only, the barely there breathing of the fire's last heat, the long, deep, utterly even respiration of the sleeping hounds, the occasional very faint sound from somewhere in the fabric of the building itself, the slight creak of timber as it adjusts to the night's cooling, The minute shift of a stone under the differential pressure of temperature change sounds so small and so infrequent that they do not disturb the quiet. They only measure it. The candle flame is reflected in the window glass. There are two flames now, the real one on the sill and its double in the glass, slightly distorted by the irregular thickness of the hand-blown panes, softer and more wavering than the original, a ghost flame in a ghost window. They burn in unison. They are the same flame, seen from two sides of the glass that separates the warm interior from the cold exterior dark, and they divide that darkness between them with the quiet authority of a very small light in a very large dark, which is, in the end, what every flame has always been. The wax shortens. The flame holds steady. The glass reflects. Somewhere in the pine forest on the slope above the valley, an owl calls one long, soft, descending note that rolls through the trees and over the castle wall and into the sleeping courtyard and disperses there against the cold cobblestones without echo. It is the kind of sound that, if you hear it on the edge of sleep, you receive as part of your dream rather than as an interruption of it, a sound so right for the darkness it inhabits that it belongs to the dream space, as naturally as the warmth of your bed and the slow dissolution of the day's last thoughts into something softer, stranger, larger. You are nearly there. You have always been nearly there, in the slow minutes of this long evening, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the corridors and the smell of rosemary and beeswax and old wool. The castle has been doing its work, which is the work of shelter, which is the oldest work of human making, which is the work of saying in stone and fire and candlelight that the dark outside has been accounted for and the cold has been held off and the people inside are safe, and they can let go and they can rest, and the building will hold its shape around them through every hour of the night, through the cooling and the quieting and the owl's long note, and the river's steady running and the stars slow wheeling overhead. And it will still be standing when the eastern sky begins at last to change. The candle shortens. The flame holds. In, out. The way a breath holds. The way a heart holds. The eastern sky beyond the window glass is still entirely dark, but the darkness has a quality now that is perhaps very slightly different from the darkness of an hour ago, perhaps. Or perhaps not yet. Perhaps this is only the mind's desire for the morning playing its familiar trick, the hope for light shaping itself into the perception of light before the reality has arrived. The sky will decide in its own time. The sky has always decided in its own time over this castle and over every other thing that has stood in its slow, patient light, and it will go on deciding long after every candle in every room has burned to nothing and been replaced and burned again. Let the darkness hold you. Let the warmth hold you. Let the old stones hold you with the same uncomplicated permanence with which they have held every person who has rested in their keeping. The flame is very small now. The castle breathes. The night breathes. You breathe. And somewhere far below in the valley, the river moves over its stones in the dark. And the sound it makes is the sound of time passing gently, of water finding its way, of everything that has been arriving slowly at the sea and returning slowly to the sky and falling again on the high moorland and finding its way back down through the dark, to the valley floor always moving, always returning, always the same river and always entirely new. The candle holds its last inch. The hounds breathe in the rose-red dark. The stars above the castle's highest tower burn with a clarity so complete that they seem to make a sound, a very high, very faint, entirely imagined ringing, the sound of distance and cold fire, the sound of time so vast it ceases to be frightening and becomes instead a kind of music, the oldest kind, the kind that the body hears below the level of the ears and rests inside without knowing it is resting. You're welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.